The knock came at midnight, 3 slow hits, like someone was counting down his life. Jace Merrin froze with a wrench in one hand and a lantern in the other, listening to the wind scrape the tin roof of his farmhouse. Nobody visited Sable Ridge. Nobody even traveled this far out on Kestrel 9 anymore. And yet the knocking returned, harder now, desperate, followed by a thin, breaking sound that didn't belong on an empty world, a woman's sob. For 10 years, Jace had built his days to be quieter than his memories. He lived alone on a human frontier planet where the sky carried 2 pale moons and the nights were so cold they made metal sing. His farm was the last stubborn dot of light beyond the colony's safe ring, miles of dark prairie and thorn scrub between him and the nearest neighbor. He liked it that way. The colony administrators called him non-compliant. They said he should move closer, use official equipment, accept help. Jace said nothing. He had stopped arguing with people when arguing stopped bringing anyone back. Inside, the house smelled of old wood, machine oil, and soil. His hands smelled the same. He had grown wheat bulbs that survived Kestrel 9's thin rain. He raised 6-legged grazer beasts that gave milk so sweet it tasted like warm honey. He repaired his own solar field, his own water pumps, his own fences. If something broke, he fixed it. If something hurt, he ignored it. That was the deal he had made with the universe. The knock came again, for strikes this time, frantic, uneven. Jace set the lantern down and reached up to the wall above the fireplace. The rifle he kept there wasn't for show. Out here, wild things prowled. Not monsters from horror stories, real predators with bone-hook claws and fast hunger. He checked the chamber, then moved toward the back door. The sobbing continued, softer now, like it was running out of breath. "Who's there?" Jace called. His voice sounded strange to him, like a tool he hadn't used in years. No answer. Only a weak, scraping thud, as if someone had slid down the door until they hit the floor. Jace's mind built possibilities like stacked crates, a lost colonist, a trap, a wounded animal, a thief, a hallucination. He hated the last one most. He had spent too many nights alone with his thoughts to trust what his brain might invent. He unlatched the door and opened it a hand's width. Moonlight fell across a figure curled on his step. A woman, humanoid, but not human, shivering, naked, and covered in frost-damp dust. Her skin held a faint blue-gray glow, like stone lit from within. Her hair was white and long, tangled with bits of dry grass. When she lifted her face, her eyes caught the lantern light and flashed a deep violet. Her mouth opened, and the sound that came out was not a scream. It was a plea. "Please," she whispered. Her words were broken, but they were words. "Hide. Help. They." Her throat hitched. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She pressed her palms to the wood as if the door itself was the only thing keeping her alive. Jace stared, rifle lowered without realizing it. His mind was trying to reject the scene. Aliens existed, everyone on Kestrel 9 knew that. The Ventari Authority controlled half the local sector, a cold empire of ships and rules and taxes. But Ventari soldiers didn't knock. And no Ventari would be found half dead on a human farmer's step. "Who are you?" Jace asked. She swallowed hard, struggling for breath. "Naylor," she said, and her voice carried a strange musical edge. I ran." "From what?" The night behind her seemed to deepen. The prairie stretched empty, but emptiness could hide a lot. Naylor trembled so violently her teeth clicked. "Hunters." Jace's instinct screamed to slam the door, lock it, and pretend he had never heard the knock. That instinct had kept him alive in 100 small ways. But another instinct, older, harder to kill, pushed back. "A person is at your door. A person is crying." Jace stepped back and opened the door wide. "Inside. Now." Naylor tried to rise. Her legs failed. Jace hesitated only a second before crouching and lifting her. She was lighter than she should have been, all sharp bones and shaking heat. Her skin was warmer than the night air, almost feverish. He carried her into the kitchen and set her on a chair near the stove. She flinched at every sound, as if expecting the world to strike her. Jace grabbed a wool blanket from a hook and wrapped it around her shoulders, then turned away and yanked open a drawer. He pulled out an oversized flannel shirt and a pair of work pants. "Put these on," he said, setting them on the table. He kept his eyes on the window, scanning the dark line of the field. Behind him came the soft rustle of cloth and the sharp inhale of someone trying not to cry anymore. When he glanced back, Naylor was swallowed by his clothes. The flannel hung to her thighs, sleeves rolled. The pants were tied tight with a strip of blanket fabric. She looked like a child in a borrowed costume, except her eyes were not childish. They were exhausted. "There," Jace said. "Better." Naylor clutched the blanket around herself like armor. "Thank you." "You speak trade," he said. "How?" Naylor's gaze flicked toward the windows again. "I listened, for a long time." That answer didn't comfort him at all. Jace moved to the sink and filled a tin cup with water. He slid it to her. "Drink." She obeyed, but her hands shook so much water spilled down her chin. Jace saw bruises along her wrists, faint, circular marks like restraints. His jaw tightened. "Who's hunting you?" he asked. "Ventari," she said. The word came out like poison. "But not soldiers. Quiet ones." Jace knew those stories. The authority had enforcement teams that didn't carry flags. They took people and made them disappear. The colony officials denied it. Out here, denial meant nothing. Naylor swallowed and pointed to her left shoulder. Under the flannel, something pulsed faintly, light bleeding through cloth in slow waves. "I have a seed," she said. "A seed." Jace repeated. "A code. A key. Proof." Her breathing sped up. "They cannot let humans have it." Jace felt a cold weight settle in his chest. A decade of isolation had made him calm in storms, but this was a different kind of weather, political, violent, endless. "Why come here?" he demanded. "Why my farm?" Naylor's lips trembled. "Because no one watches the dead places. And because you are alone." Jace didn't like how she said that. Like it wasn't a choice. Before he could respond, a low hum rolled through the walls. The cups on the shelf vibrated. The lantern flame flickered. Jace moved to the window and pulled the curtain back 1 inch. A shadow slid over the wheat bulbs outside, smooth, silent, too big to be a transport drone. It hovered above his field like a dark coin against the moons. A strip of pale light scanned the ground in a slow, searching sweep. Jace's stomach dropped. Naylor whispered from behind him, voice thin with fear. "They found me." The beam paused at the edge of the farmhouse yard. The craft lowered, crushing a line of crops with its downwash. Jace's hands clenched. Those crops weren't just food. They were his life. His work. 10 years of rebuilding something that didn't want to exist. He turned back to Naylor. She was standing now, blanket wrapped tight, eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall again. Jace exhaled, slow and steady, like he was aiming. "Basement," he said. "Go." Naylor didn't argue. She moved fast, silent, like someone trained to survive. Jace lifted the rifle and checked the sights. Then he looked at the tools on his counter, wrenches, copper wire, salt packs, a canister of fertilizer gel. He wasn't a soldier anymore. But he was a human. And humans, when cornered, didn't just fight with weapons. They fought with whatever they could build. Outside, something clicked against the porch. A boot. A second boot. The door handle tested, careful, confident. Jace raised the rifle and smiled without humor. "All right," he muttered, voice low. "Let's see what your quiet hunters know about farmers." The handle turned again, slow, patient, like whoever stood outside had all night. Jace didn't fire. Not yet. He stepped away from the window and moved through the kitchen with quiet speed. Years of living alone had trained him to hear small things, a loose floorboard, a wind shift, a grazer beast coughing in the barn. Now he listened for the rhythm of the intruder, boots, breathing, the faint scrape of metal. Outside, the hovering craft hummed like a giant insect. Its searchlight slid across his field, painting his crops in cold white stripes. Jace's eyes flicked to the counter. Tools. copper wire, salt packs, fertilizer gel canisters, a box of old, cracked batteries he'd kept because he hated wasting anything. People in the colony threw broken things away. Jace turned broken things into solutions. He crossed the living room and lifted the rug. The trapdoor sat flush with the floor, almost invisible. He tapped twice, his signal. A whisper floated up. "I'm here." "Stay quiet," he murmured. "No matter what you hear." Nayla's violet eyes glowed faintly in the darkness below. She nodded once, lips pressed tight, fear held back by pure will. Jace lowered the trapdoor carefully and rolled the rug back into place. Then he walked to the back of the house, opened a cabinet, and pulled out a coil of wire and a small handheld controller. It was meant for his electric fence, the one that kept predators off his grazers. He had upgraded it over the years until it could make even the biggest hook-claw beasts yelp and retreat. He also had a rule: never use it on people. Rules changed when strangers tested your door in the middle of the night. The handle clicked. The door didn't open. Jace had reinforced it with a steel bar after the first year on Kestrel 9. He had never trusted safe zones and patrol routes. He trusted wood and metal and his own hands. A soft voice came through the wood, distorted by the gap in the frame. It spoke trade like a machine that had learned to imitate human calm. "Human resident. Open the door." Jace felt his heart beat slow. That voice wasn't asking. It was ordering. He didn't answer. The voice continued, still calm. "Harboring a fugitive is a violation of authority ordinance. Cooperate and you will not be harmed." Jace almost laughed. Authority ordinance didn't mean anything out here. Out here, survival was the only ordinance. He stepped to the window again, just enough to see without exposing himself. 3 figures stood on his back porch. They were tall and lean, wearing matte black armor that swallowed moonlight. Their helmets were smooth with no visible eyes, only a thin slit that pulsed faintly like a sensor. They carried compact weapons with short barrels and no visible ammunition. Quiet hunters, Nayla had said. Jace's skin prickled. These weren't normal patrol soldiers. They moved like they were built for silence, for doors, for dark corners, for taking people without leaving evidence. One of them lifted a hand. A thin tool extended from its wrist and pressed against the lock. A faint blue spark crawled across the metal. Jace stepped back from the window and moved fast. He didn't try to outgun them. He tried to outthink them. He crossed the kitchen and yanked open a floor panel near the stove. Underneath was a maintenance channel for the old water line he had repurposed for irrigation. Inside, he had hidden a secondary cable line, his own homemade circuit that connected to the fence grid and a buried ring of metal stakes around the house. A lightning garden, he had joked to himself once. A stupid name for a serious idea. If something tried to rush his house, it would step into a trap. He clipped the controller into the circuit, then checked the meter. The fence battery was half charged. Not ideal, but enough. The lock outside sparked again, stronger. Jace grabbed a small battery pack from the counter and tore it open with a screwdriver. He exposed the wiring, stripped it with his teeth, and twisted it into the fence controller's input. It was messy. It was dangerous. It was also fast. He glanced at the fertilizer gel canister. His wheat bulbs thrived on it, and if handled wrong, it could burn skin like acid. He slid it into a pouch at his belt. Then he snatched a bag of salt packs, cheap mineral blocks he used for the grazers, and shoved 2 into his jacket. On the porch, the lock clicked. The door opened an inch. Jace moved. He flipped the kitchen light on. A bright glow poured through the doorway, and for half a second, the hunters hesitated. That hesitation told Jace something important. They weren't used to humans doing the unexpected. Jace fired the rifle, not at them, but at the porch light above their heads. Glass exploded. Sparks rained down. The porch dropped into darkness again, and the hunters reacted like a single creature, weapons lifting. That was exactly what Jace wanted. He hit the fence controller. A sharp crack filled the air as the buried ring of stakes around the porch surged with power. A blue-white arc jumped between metal points hidden under the porch boards, an invisible cage suddenly alive. Two hunters stepped forward at the same time. Their boots landed on the porch. The electricity snapped upward like angry lightning. It wrapped around their legs and climbed their armor in flickering lines. For the first time, they made a sound. Not a scream, something clipped and harsh, like a radio glitch. They jerked, spasmed, and dropped their weapons. One stumbled backward off the porch, hitting the dirt hard. The third hunter didn't step into the trap. It studied it. Jace felt a chill. Smart. Cautious. The leader. The leader lifted its weapon and fired, not at Jace, but at the porch boards. A silent pulse flashed. The trap's glow flickered. The arcs weakened. An energy disruptor. Jace swore under his breath. Of course they had tech for that. He threw the two salt packs. They struck the damp porch boards and burst open, scattering white mineral chunks everywhere. Salt wasn't magic. But salt, moisture, and electricity made problems. The arcs jumped again, stronger, chaotic, crawling across the mineral scatter like a living net. The two hunters on the porch convulsed once more and went still. The leader raised its weapon, aiming through the gap. Jace dropped behind the counter as the shot tore through the wall, punching a neat hole through wood like it was paper. The air smelled of burnt resin. Jace's mind raced. The trap wouldn't hold forever. And if the leader got inside, it would find the basement. He needed to end this. Fast. He grabbed the fertilizer gel canister, twisted the cap, and smeared a thick line across the floor near the doorway, right where the leader would step. Then he took his stripped battery pack and tossed it, carefully, onto the gel line. A tiny spark danced. The gel hissed. Not fire. Not an explosion. Something worse. A thick, choking chemical smoke erupted in a low cloud, hugging the floor and rolling outward. It wasn't lethal, not yet, but it burned eyes and lungs and made anyone inhale regret. The leader stepped back instantly, too fast to be normal. It lifted its wrist and a small filter mask slid over its helmet slit. Prepared. Jace's stomach tightened again. Then the humming outside changed pitch. The hovering craft lowered closer, and the searchlight snapped toward the house like an eye focusing. A thin beam hit the roof. The wood groaned. Jace realized the truth with a cold rush. The hunters weren't the main threat. The craft was. The leader spoke again, voice still calm, now sharper. Cease resistance. Release the asset. Jace rose slowly, rifle in hand, smoke curling around his legs. No, he said. The beam on the roof intensified. The ceiling creaked as if the house itself was being peeled open. Jace's jaw clenched. He had built this place with his own hands. He had planted every row, fixed every board. This was his world. And now an alien machine was trying to rip it apart like it was nothing. Jace didn't feel fear anymore. He felt anger. He looked toward the rug that hid the trapdoor and spoke quietly, not turning his head. Naylor, he called. A soft reply rose from below. Yes. If I tell you to run, he said, you run. No arguing. A pause. Then, steady, I understand. Jace's eyes locked on the hovering craft through the window. He could see a seam along its underside, an access panel, maybe a sensor bay, maybe a power conduit. He had one chance. He grabbed the last salt pack, the remaining battery wires, and a handful of copper scrap from his workbench. A farmer's tools. A human's weapons. And as the roof began to split under the alien beam, Jace Merrin sprinted toward the front door, straight into the night, ready to do something so reckless and so creative that no quiet hunter would ever predict it. Jace burst through the front door as the beam carved a glowing scar across his roof. Cold night air slammed into him, sharp and alive. The hovering craft loomed overhead, smooth and dark, its underside lit by the pale glow of scanning arrays. It hung there like a patient predator, certain its prey had nowhere left to run. That certainty was its first mistake. Jace hit the dirt and rolled, energy fire slicing through the space where his head had been a heartbeat earlier. He came up running, boots pounding soil he knew better than any map. The field stretched before him, rows of wheat bulbs, irrigation lines, sensor stakes, and buried cables laid out by his hands over 10 long years. This wasn't just a farm. It was a system. Behind him, the leader hunter stepped onto the porch, weapon raised. The two others lay motionless, armor still twitching from residual charge. The leader didn't look at them. It tracked Jace, calculating angles, predicting paths. Jace sprinted between crop rows, counting steps in his head. 3, 4, now. He slammed his heel down. The ground erupted. Not an explosion, something more controlled. The soil collapsed inward as a section of field dropped into a shallow pit. The hunter behind him reacted instantly, leaping aside with inhuman speed. The craft above adjusted, searchlight snapping to the disturbance. Jace grinned despite the burn in his lungs. He had built that pit for grazers that dug too deep. Reinforced edges. A false surface. A lesson in gravity. He veered left, skidding through damp soil as a pulse shot scorched the air beside him. He rolled again, came up behind an irrigation tower, and slapped his palm against a hidden panel. Water roared. High-pressure jets burst from the ground across the field, turning neat rows into rivers of mud. The wheat bulbs bent but didn't break. He had bred them for storms. The hunter's boots, however, sank. The leader fired again, precise, relentless. Shots punched through metal supports. The tower collapsed in a shriek of tearing steel. Jace didn't slow. He ran for the barn. The barn sat at the far edge of the field, squat and solid, built from local stone and scavenged alloy. Inside were tools, batteries, fuel cells, and one thing Jace had never expected to use against anyone intelligent. A windmill. The blades above creaked as the alien craft's downdraft buffeted them. Jace hit the barn door, slammed it shut behind him, and dove for the control box mounted on the wall. Outside, the craft lowered further. The searchlight cut through the barn roof, burning a glowing circle that smoked and cracked. Jace ripped the control panel open and jammed his copper scrap into the exposed contacts. Sparks flew. The windmill shuddered, then spun faster, far faster than it was designed to. "Come on," Jace muttered. "Come on." The leader hunter reached the barn door. It didn't try to break it. It pressed its palm to the surface, and the metal began to soften, warping under directed heat. Jace flipped the last switch. The windmill screamed. Energy surged down the buried lines Jace had laid years ago, never finished, never connected to anything official. He had called it a future project. Something to look at when he got bored. The energy didn't go into storage. It went into the ground. The field lit up. Hidden stakes erupted with blue-white arcs, not a neat ring this time, but a chaotic web. The mud became conductive. The water turned the whole prairie into a living circuit. The leader hunter took one step. The electricity climbed its armor in wild branches, shorting systems, overloading shields. The hunter convulsed, weapon dropping as it collapsed into the mud. The hovering craft reacted instantly, pulling up and away from the ground. Its beam cut off. Its underside panels flared with defensive light. Jace staggered as the windmill tore itself apart behind him, gears exploding, blades snapping free and cartwheeling into the dark. The barn shuddered, half collapsed. Jace didn't stop to admire the destruction. He ran back toward the house. The craft repositioned, clearly reassessing. It had lost its ground team. It had underestimated the environment. Now it switched tactics. A hatch opened on its underside. Something dropped. Jace's heart sank as he recognized the shape, a seeker drone. Small, fast, equipped with sensors and weapons meant for close pursuit. It screamed toward him, scanning, adjusting. Jace dove behind a fallen irrigation pipe as the drone fired, cutting furrows through the soil. He rolled, came up near the porch, and skidded to a stop beside the house. "Naylor!" he shouted. "Now!" The trapdoor burst open. Naylor emerged, eyes blazing, her shoulder marking glowing bright enough to cast shadows. She ran toward him, clutching a small pack he hadn't seen before. "They are locking onto your energy signature," she shouted. "The craft will not retreat." "Figures," Jace said. "Can you run?" "Yes." "Good." He grabbed her hand. The moment their skin touched, the world tilted. Jace gasped as a flood of sensation rushed through him. fear not his own, sharp and ancient, layered with determination like steel wrapped in silk. He felt Nayla's panic, her hope, her absolute certainty that this moment mattered more than her life. She felt his in return. His grief. His stubbornness. His refusal to yield. For a heartbeat, they understood each other completely. Then the drone screamed closer. Jace dragged her around the side of the house, toward the old storm cellar he had dug by hand. He slapped the latch open and shoved her inside. "Stay down," he said. "If I don't make it." Nayla grabbed his sleeve. Her eyes burned. "You will." Jace hesitated. Then he nodded once and slammed the hatch shut. The drone rounded the corner, weapons charging. Jace stood in the open, alone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the last battery pack, wires twisted, terminals bare. He looked at the solar array mounted on the roof, angled just right, cracked but functional. He raised the battery and threw it. Not at the drone. At the solar array. The battery struck metal. Sparks erupted. The array surged, dumping raw power down its lines. Jace leapt aside as the energy flooded the house, racing through every improvised circuit he had ever installed. The drone fired. The pulse hit the house. And the house answered. A blinding flash erupted as the overloaded system discharged outward, a violent electromagnetic burst that slammed into the drone mid-air. Its sensors went dark. Its control systems fried. It dropped like a stone, smashing into the dirt yards from Jace. Silence fell. The hovering craft backed away, engines flaring as it climbed higher, recalculating, retreating to a safer distance. Jace lay on his back, staring at the stars, chest heaving. He laughed, short, breathless, almost disbelieving. From the storm cellar, Nayla's voice floated up, trembling. "Is it over?" Jace pushed himself to his feet. He looked at the ruined field, the shattered barn, the scorched roof. At the alien craft retreating into the clouds. "For tonight," he said. He opened the cellar hatch and offered her his hand. Nayla took it. Above them, the twin moons watched in silence. And far away, the Ventari Authority began to understand a dangerous truth. Humans did not need armies to fight back. They only needed time, tools, and a reason. Morning came slowly, as if the planet itself was unsure whether the night was truly over. Jace stood at the edge of his ruined field, boots sunk in mud, watching steam rise from scorched soil. Broken windmill blades lay scattered like fallen spears. The barn leaned at an angle that promised collapse with the next strong wind. His house still stood, but barely. Burn marks scarred the walls, and the roof sagged where the alien beam had cut deep. 10 years of work, damaged in one night. Behind him, Nayla stepped out of the farmhouse, wrapped in a thick coat Jace had found for her. She moved carefully, as if afraid the ground itself might turn against them again. Her shoulder markings still glowed faintly, pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm. "They will report this," she said quietly. "The Authority does not ignore losses." Jace nodded. He already knew. The craft hadn't fled in panic. It had withdrawn with purpose. That meant data, analysis, and escalation. "They'll come back with more," he said. "Different tactics." "Yes," Nayla replied. "And not just here." Jace turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then lifted her chin. "What happened last night will not stay local. The Ventari observe everything. A single human resisting and defeating a hunter unit with improvised technology, this challenges their assumptions." Jace snorted softly. "I didn't defeat them. I survived." "In Ventari doctrine," Nayla said, "those are the same thing." That answer sat heavy in the air. Jace walked back toward the house and motioned for her to follow. Inside, he activated his old communication terminal, a battered console he used only for supply orders and crop sales. It hummed reluctantly, as if offended at being asked to do more. Static filled the screen. Then text began to scroll. Unauthorized energy surge detected. Sector alert pending review. Please stand by. Jace leaned back in his chair. That didn't take long. Nayla's eyes narrowed. They are flagging you. Yeah, he said. Humans love paperwork. He started typing. Fast, precise. He sent a short message, stripped of emotion, loaded with data. Energy readings. Visual logs. Drone wreckage. Time stamps. He sent it not to colonial administration. He sent it to everyone. Independent human channels. Fringe networks. Civilian researchers. Old military contacts he hadn't spoken to in years. If the Ventari watched everything, then humans would too. The terminal beeped. Incoming transmission. Jace frowned. That was fast. The screen flickered, then resolved into the image of a woman in a dark uniform. Her hair was cropped short, her eyes sharp and tired. A rank insignia glinted at her collar. Jace Merrin, she said. This is Commander Ilara Vance, Colonial Defense Liaison. Jace folded his arms. Didn't know you folks still remembered I existed. Her gaze flicked to the damage behind him, then to Naylor standing in the background. Oh, Vance said slowly. We remember now. She leaned closer to the camera. You engaged Ventari covert units and disabled a huntercraft using civilian infrastructure. Do you have any idea what kind of attention that draws? Jace met her stare. I didn't invite them. No, she agreed. But you embarrassed them. Naylor stepped forward. Commander Vance, she said calmly. The Ventari will not stop. The data I carry threatens their control systems across multiple occupied worlds. Vance's expression hardened. So it's true. Jace glanced at Naylor. You didn't tell me you were that important. Naylor's lips curved in a sad smile. I told you enough to keep you alive. Vance exhaled slowly. Mr. Merrin, evacuation teams can reach you within 6 hours. We recommend immediate extraction. Jace looked around his home, his broken barn, his scarred field, the place where he had rebuilt his life piece by piece. No, he said. Vance blinked. No. They'll expect me to run, Jace continued. They already know how humans fight when we're scared. Last night showed them something else. That you're reckless. Vance snapped. That we adapt, Jace shot back. That a single human, with no support, can cost them resources. Vance was silent for a moment. Then she said, carefully, you're suggesting bait. I'm suggesting a message, Jace replied. They came here thinking this was a dead place. Let's make sure they understand how wrong they were. Naylor turned to him, eyes wide. Jace, this will put you in direct conflict with an interstellar authority. Jace shrugged. They already put themselves in my kitchen. Vance studied him like a puzzle she didn't like but couldn't ignore. If we do this, she said, you won't be alone. Jace smiled faintly. Wasn't planning on it. The screen blinked again, new alerts stacking fast. Incoming traffic. Unidentified signals. Multiple sources. Vance's eyes widened as she scanned the data. You've triggered a cascade. Jace leaned forward. Good. Naylor closed her eyes, placing a hand over her glowing shoulder. Others are responding, she said softly. Not just humans. Jace frowned. Others. Species the Ventari suppressed quietly, Naylor explained. Scientists. Engineers. Farmers. People like you. Outside, a distant rumble echoed across the plains. Jace stepped onto the porch. On the horizon, lights appeared, not sleek warships, but mismatched vessels. Cargo haulers. Survey craft. Old transports refitted with stubborn hope and ugly modifications. They weren't arriving in formation. They were arriving in defiance. Jace felt something shift inside him. The isolation he had worn like armor cracked. Behind him, Naylor joined him on the porch. You lit a signal fire, she said. Whether you meant to or not. Jace watched the sky fill with movement. Guess the galaxy was listening. Far above, unseen but aware, Ventari command analysts processed the data. A human farmer. Improvised systems. Environmental warfare. Viral transmission of proof. Their models began to fail. And for the first time in a long time, the Ventari Authority faced a problem it could not quietly remove. Because humans didn't stay quiet. They shared. They learned. They showed up. And this time, the field that fought back was only the beginning. The sky over Sable Ridge did not return to silence. By midday, Jace's sensors, patched together from farming equipment and old colony surplus, picked up more than 30 inbound signals. None followed standard approach patterns. Some limped through the atmosphere like tired birds. Others cut sharp, aggressive lines, engines tuned by instinct instead of regulation. Jace stood beside the farmhouse, arms crossed, watching unfamiliar ships descend and hover at cautious distances. They did not land yet. Trust, he realized, was being negotiated in the air. Naylor stood close, her presence steadying in a way he still didn't fully understand. The glow on her shoulder had intensified, no longer just a pulse but a steady light, as if responding to something beyond the horizon. "They are afraid," she said. "Of the Ventari?" Jace asked. "Of hope," she replied. "Hope gets people killed, until it doesn't." The first ship to land was human. A bulky cargo hauler stripped of company markings, its hull patched with mismatched alloy plates. The ramp lowered, and a woman stepped out wearing grease-stained overalls and a pilot's grin that had survived too many bad landings. "Jace Merrin," she called. "That depends," Jace said. "You here to arrest me or help me rebuild my barn?" She laughed.
"Name's Cora Venn.
Independent engineer. I saw your data dump." She gestured behind her, where crates were already being unloaded by a small crew. "You turned a farm into a denial zone using irrigation and copper wire. That's beautiful." Jace blinked. "You came all this way for that?" "I came because you reminded people of something," Cora said. "That the Ventari aren't unbeatable. Just predictable." More ships followed. A slender, insectoid vessel descended next, its hull grown, not built. A ramp unfolded like a petal, and 3 figures emerged, tall and jointed, their eyes multifaceted and bright. Naylor inhaled sharply. "The Keth." Jace stiffened. "Friends of yours." "Once," Naylor said. "Before the Ventari took their orbital habitats." The lead Keth stepped forward, its voice translated through a hovering device. "Human Jace Merrin. Your resistance has altered probability streams." Jace raised an eyebrow. "Good to know." The Keth inclined its head. "We bring materials. And warnings." Behind them came others. A pair of stocky bipeds with stone-like skin and mining gear slung over their shoulders. A thin, floating being encased in a translucent sphere, its thoughts rendered into sound by a humming translator. Humans from the inner colonies. Humans from the edges. People who had been watching the Ventari take piece after piece, waiting for someone to show them how to push back. Jace felt overwhelmed, and something else. Responsibility. Commander Vance's image flickered to life on his terminal again. Her background was chaos now. Movement, voices, alarms. "This is escalating faster than predicted," she said. "Ventari fleets are mobilizing." Jace nodded. "We figured." Vance looked past the camera, then back at him. "You have allies forming on your doorstep. That makes this unofficial." "Unofficial works for me," Jace replied. Naylor stepped into frame. "Commander, the data I carry is only part of it. The Ventari neural control system depends on centralized calibration nodes. Humans think in decentralized ways. That is why they never suspected this vulnerability." Vance's eyes sharpened. "You're saying we can break their control?" "Yes," Naylor said. "But not alone." Jace turned to the gathering crowd outside. Engineers. Farmers. Scientists. Pilots. Species that had never shared a table before, now standing in the mud of his ruined field. "Well," he said loudly, "guess we better start talking." They gathered in the barn's remains, pushing aside broken beams and laying out portable lights. Blueprints were drawn on tablet screens and scratched into dirt. Ideas flew faster than the translators could keep up. Cora sketched power routing concepts using human grid chaos instead of Ventari precision. The Keth proposed bioreactive materials that adapted instead of obeying commands. The stone-skinned miners talked about hollowing asteroids into signal blockers. Human coders described viral logic traps that learned while being attacked. Jace listened more than he spoke. He noticed a pattern. Every Ventari system assumed obedience. Every human system assumed failure, and planned around it. Naylor watched it all, her eyes bright. "This is why they fear you," she whispered to Jace. "You do not build for perfection. You build for survival." By nightfall, Sable Ridge had transformed. Temporary towers rose where irrigation poles once stood. Ships parked nose to nose like stubborn animals daring each other to move. The farm became a workshop, a meeting ground, a message. And the message was spreading. Ventari scouts appeared at the edge of sensor range, watching, not attacking. Their hesitation spoke louder than weapons fire. "They're waiting for command approval," Cora said with a smirk. "Good," Jace replied. "We're terrible at following orders." Naylor approached him as the moons rose. "Jace, there is something you must know." He turned to her. "About the data." "About me," she said softly. "The seed I carry, it is not just information. It is a framework. A way to translate intent across species." Jace frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning," she said, "that what you are building here could become more than resistance. It could become a language." Jace looked out at the lights, the people, the strange and fragile unity forming on his land. "A language for what?" he asked. Naylor met his gaze. "For saying no." High above, Ventari Command received reports they did not like. Humans were not rallying under flags. They were rallying under ideas. And ideas, once shared, did not stay contained. The Ventari did not wait for permission anymore. At dawn, the sky over Sable Ridge fractured. Jace felt it before the alarm sounded, a pressure in the air, like the world was holding its breath. Naylor stiffened beside him, her shoulder mark flaring bright silver. "They have committed," she said. "This is no longer containment. This is punishment." The first ships broke through the clouds in perfect formation. Sleek. Identical. Cold. Ventari warcraft, dozens of them, their hulls reflecting the twin suns like knives. Around the farm, engines roared to life. Human pilots swore. Alien crews scrambled. No one ran. Commander Vance's voice cut through the chaos over every open channel. "All units, listen up. This is not a stand-up fight. You follow the plan, you trust the network, and you adapt." Jace tightened the straps on his field jacket. "Funny," he muttered. "That's always been the plan." The Ventari opened with precision strikes. Energy lances stabbed downward, targeting power nodes, communication towers, anything that looked important. Most of those targets were decoys. The real systems, messy, overlapping, improvised, kept running. Cora's voice crackled over the channel. "Grids fragmenting just like we designed. They can't lock a firing solution." Above them, Ventari fighters descended, fast and confident. Then the sky began to lie. Sensor ghosts bloomed across their displays, ships where there were none, signals splitting and recombining, reflections that shouldn't exist. The Keth biomaterials warped electromagnetic fields, growing and shifting in response to attack patterns. Ventari targeting algorithms hesitated. That hesitation cost them. Human pilots dove through the confusion, not in formation, not even in coordination by Ventari standards. They flew like people who expected systems to fail, because they always did. One Ventari fighter overshot its target and collided with a phantom signal, its shields flaring uselessly as a human cargo ship, retrofit with mining lasers, cut across its flank. On the ground, stone-skinned miners activated subterranean dampeners. Ventari ground troops dropped into what they thought was solid terrain and vanished into gravity traps tuned to their armor weight. Jace ran between stations, shouting, rerouting, fixing things with his hands when software failed. He slammed a panel closed with a wrench and laughed when it sparked back to life. "This is what happens," he yelled to no one in particular, "when you assume people will behave." Naylor stood at the center of it all, her mark blazing like a small sun. She had linked herself to the network, not as a commander, but as a translator. Intent flowed through her, not orders. Urgency, creativity, trust. Ventari systems choked on it. They could not parse emotion as data. They could not predict choice. A Ventari command ship descended lower, its presence heavy, undeniable. Its voice boomed across all channels, stripped of pretense. "Humans, cease. You are not equipped for escalation." Jace wiped sweat from his eyes and keyed his "funny thing about humans," he said. "We don't escalate. We improvise." Naylor reached out and placed her hand on his arm. The connection surged, stronger than before. Jace felt it, not just her thoughts, but the networks. Fear and courage braided together. Thousands of minds aligned not by command, but by shared understanding. The seed activated. Across Ventara-controlled space, calibration nodes began to drift. Not fail, drift. Slipping just enough to break neural control loops. Enslaved workers paused. Soldiers hesitated. Entire systems fell out of sync. Ventari commanders shouted into the void, demanding compliance from machines that suddenly did not agree on what compliance meant. On Sable Ridge, the command ship fired. A beam lanced toward the farmhouse. Jace didn't move. The beam bent. Keth biofields curved it aside, scattering energy harmlessly into the upper atmosphere. The Ventari ship faltered, its shields flickering as conflicting data tore through its control systems. Vance's voice came through, fierce and disbelieving. "Their networks unraveling." Naylor's voice shook, not with fear, but with awe. "They built empires on control. You built chaos, and shared it." Jace looked up at the warship hanging uncertainly above his farm and felt something settle in his chest. For the first time since he had chosen isolation, he didn't feel small. The Ventari command ship began to withdraw. Then another. Then all of them. Not retreating in panic. Retreating in calculation. They had learned. The battlefield went quiet except for crackling fires and exhausted laughter. People embraced. Some cried. Some simply sat down where they stood, overwhelmed by the fact that they were still alive. Jace leaned against a broken post, breathing hard. Naylor stood beside him, light dimming at last. "This is not the end," she said softly. "No," Jace agreed. "But it's a start." High above, the Ventari Authority logged the engagement as a strategic anomaly. They would spend years trying to understand what went wrong. They would fail. Because the thing that broke them was not a weapon. It was humanity's oldest, most dangerous trait. The ability to work together without asking permission. The silence after battle was never truly silent. It hummed with cooling metal, with distant engines powering down, with people breathing who had expected not to. Sable Ridge lay scarred but standing, its fields torn, its buildings broken, but alive. Against all logic, against every Ventari projection, it had endured. Jace stood where his porch used to be, hands on his hips, staring at the wreckage. The farmhouse would need a new roof. The barn would need rebuilding from the ground up. The fields would take seasons to recover. He felt no despair, only resolve. Around him, people worked without being told. Humans and aliens side by side, lifting beams, treating wounds, sharing tools that didn't quite fit each other's hands. No flags were raised. No speeches made. This wasn't a victory parade. It was maintenance. Commander Vance approached, helmet under her arm, her uniform stained with ash and dirt. She looked less like an officer now and more like a survivor. "You know," she said, "High Command is furious." Jace smiled faintly. "I'll try to lose sleep over it." They wanted a controlled response. Negotiations. Protests. She gestured at the horizon, where Ventari ships had vanished. "You gave them something else." "Proof," Jace replied. "That control isn't the same as strength." Vance nodded. You've changed doctrine. Not just ours. Nearby, Cora argued cheerfully with a Keth engineer over how many power conduits could be safely rerouted through a single tower. The stone-skinned miners laughed as they compared scars. A human medic carefully adjusted a translator collar on a floating being who kept apologizing for bleeding light. Jace watched it all. 10 years ago, he had chosen isolation because connection hurt too much. Now he understood something he hadn't then. Isolation hurt longer. Naylor approached him quietly. Her glow was gone now, the marking on her shoulder dormant, almost ordinary. She looked tired, but lighter, as if a weight had finally shifted. The seed has dispersed, she said. It is no longer just mine. Jace glanced at her. Is that a good thing? She smiled, small and real. It is a human thing. They stood together, watching the strange, fragile coalition move like a living organism. Unplanned, uneven, impossible to fully control. A message pinged across open channels. Not from governments. Not from militaries. From individuals. Farmers on occupied worlds describing broken control collars. Engineers sharing corrupted Ventari code. Entire communities realizing, all at once, that the fear in their heads was not their own. The Ventari Authority issued a statement hours later. It was brief. Cold. Careful. They called the engagement a misunderstanding. A localized failure. An anomaly. No one believed them. Across the sector, the idea spread faster than any fleet. You don't have to win outright. You only have to break the system that says you can't fight back. Jace felt a hand slip into his. Naylor. You could leave, she said softly. Become something bigger. A symbol. Jace looked at his land, the broken fence, the muddy field, the place where everything had begun. I already am something bigger, he said. I'm home. She nodded, understanding. Above them, ships lifted off, not fleeing, not marching, just moving on. People carried what they'd learned to other places that needed it more. Sable Ridge grew quiet again. Not empty. Quiet like soil before planting. As the suns dipped low, Jace picked up a hammer and walked toward the barn ruins. Others followed without being asked. Someone handed him nails. Someone else held a beam steady. Naylor sat nearby, watching, a small smile on her face as humans did what they always did after surviving the impossible. They built. Far away, deep in Ventari space, analysts reviewed simulations that refused to converge. Too many variables. Too much unpredictability. Too much humanity. And for the first time in generations, an empire realized the most dangerous force in the galaxy was not a weapon, a fleet, or a species. It was a simple idea, shared freely. No one stands alone unless they choose to. On a quiet frontier world, a lonely farmer lifted a broken beam and set it straight. The galaxy shifted. Not with thunder, but with understanding.